So on
Yeah.
paper, at that time, man, it's like, whoa, everyone was excited. And then next thing you know, that brawl breaks out. We hear all this noise, and Bob
Yeah.
and I turn around and we got to run back to the cage, and they weren't happy. And I could understand why
Yeah.
they were not happy at all.
How do you think things would have been different, though? I mean, had the whole Nashville event just finished the way it should have finished and we moved on?
Um,
I mean, were they happy? Was CBS happy with everything that was going on? Obviously, still a little skeptical of the sport and all the human cockfighting and all the other stuff that was talked about back then. But were they happy with the numbers and happy with the sport and happy with the way things were going? And then
yeah,
that
yeah,
happened.
I think they were happy. Fedor did well. Fedor on CBS did well. They really got behind it. They being CBS, and you could really feel the excitement. Um, and they were showing us a lot of love, so that went well, and that it really went well going into that event in Nashville. We go out and Coker cuts a really great deal and makes some moves to bring Dan Henderson over, which was a very big deal at the
Yeah,
time. And yeah, it
yeah, it
was
was
huge.
huge.
And so there was a lot of excitement and momentum leading into that event in Nashville.
Yeah.
Uh, Unfortunately, the fights just didn't, play out. Like on paper, they were great. If I remember correctly, it was Gil versus Aoki. It
Mm-hmm.
was Mo versus Musasi. And then you had Jake and Dan Henderson. So on
Yeah.
paper, at that time, man, it's like, whoa, everyone was excited. It was a big card. And then the fights just, I believe they were all decisions, right? It didn't play out. It didn't play out the
Yeah.
way fans wanted to. They weren't these exciting barn burners. They were just they were very well matched. They're just very strategic fights where
Mhm.
guys did what they had to do to get their hand raised. And at the end of the day, as you know,
Yeah.
that doesn't always mean it's going to be an exciting fight.
Yeah. That doesn't translate to exciting fights for the
No,
fans. Guys are out there making business decisions and not out there fighting with they're fighting with their hearts, but it's just their business. They're making a business. They're fighting
yeah,
also with
I
their
got to win.
wallets, making sure that the
Yeah,
money's
I got to
coming in.
win.
Yeah.
And I remember that after the show, immediately after the show, Dan loses a decision to Jake, and they're doing the post fight interviews, and I start walking out of the cage with Bob. So Crazy Bob and I are like walking out, and you could tell the energy wasn't there. The fights didn't live up
Mm-hmm.
to the hype. They weren't the most exciting, and I remember saying to Bob like, "Well, glad that's over." Right. And then next thing you know, that brawl breaks out. We hear all this noise, and Bob
Yeah.
and I turn around and we got to run back to the cage and get in there and start to break that whole thing up. And,
Yeah.
after that moment, there was a long break. There was a little timeout. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, those are those moments where, like, you wish in history of the sport because I think it would have changed the outcome of how whether Strikeforce was sold and whether it was. Maybe I'm speaking out of turn. Maybe it's not the case. It just felt like it was definitely it definitely held them back from growing any further because they had such a huge platform to fight on. All the fighters had to promote Strikeforce, and it just went away right after that. Like you said, a long break, and it just never was the same. The relationship felt like it was tarnished
Yeah.
after that.
Yeah. We got put on timeout. MMA as a whole got put on timeout. They weren't happy. And I could understand why
Yeah.
they were not happy at all. And I remember that night very well, the aftermath. And we knew, like, you could feel it. Like, this ain't good. This is not
Yeah.
good. And then the ratings, didn't really justify. Like you hoped, well, if we get a killer number, perhaps that'll help us survive this thing and get through it. And then the numbers, because the fights again weren't exciting, and that main event,
Yeah.
if you recall, Dan drops him early on, and credit to Jake. Jake gets knocked out. I remember watching it cage side and seeing Jake's head hit the canvas, and he wakes up and then immediately gets a
Mhm.
takedown. And Dan had a really
Yeah.
rough weight cut, a really bad one. It drained him, it zapped him. And look, no, not taking anything away from Jake. Jake did his thing.
No.
Credit to him. Um, and then Jake proceeded to just dominate the fight. And so
Yeah. After round one, it was a complete just same rinse,
Yeah,
wash, repeat.
yeah.
After that,
Dan was zapped. That weight cut killed him. He was completely uh, out of energy, and then Jake just went to work. And I want to say it was just such dominant positions, like just mount for like several minutes, but couldn't finish them because Dan's tough and savvy enough to not get submitted, on the ground. And so you just had just positional, win. And as we said, sometimes those aren't, what fans want to see. So yeah, ratings weren't fantastic. And then that puts you, in a bad spot where you're like, man, if the number's good, maybe we can get some forgiveness here. But clearly things just didn't line up. And you're right. Who knows what could have happened if things, if that moment doesn't happen, if that night doesn't take a turn for the worst, who knows